Today we're going to be talking about this Mercury side bowl back drag carburetor.
This is the Afterwork Garage.
In the process of getting this 1982 40 horsepower two-stroke outboard back on the water, I'm cleaning out the carburetor, and I thought it would be worth making a video on this because it's a somewhat unusual design. The throttle link is up here, and you can see the butterfly valve there, but the interesting thing is the carburetor bowl is actually on the side. So this thing right here is the carburetor bowl that fills with fuel. I guess, you know, car engines are like that. They have a carburetor bowl on the side, but they're usually situated vertically. Normally how you see a small engine carburetor, it's going to look like this, where the carburetor bowl is down here and there's a float in there that goes up and down, and it feeds fuel to a jet in the engine, or in the throttle body. Another unique feature of this carburetor is this hose right here, and what it does is it connects a port in the throttle body to the carburetor bowl right there. And what that means is that at certain throttle settings, it's exposing the carburetor bowl, which has, you know, the float and the reserve fuel that's going to go into the carburetor, to partial vacuum pressure from the intake vacuum. And what that does is it transfers that vacuum here, and while it doesn't suck gas through this hose, what it does is it actually reduces gas flow into the carburetor, because gas is now coming up through the jets, and if you on the back side of that are applying less than atmospheric pressure, it's actually going to allow less gasoline to be drawn into the engine. What that does is it leans out the mixture, and it's actually a fuel saving measure, so that in mid-range cruising in the engine, the idea is you're giving the engine less fuel, running a little bit leaner, and therefore saving fuel. And what we can see is that this nut, this port here that this hose connects to, if I take these off, it's just a little connector there and here. The back side of this, you can see these little holes in there. Got your idle jets and your booster jets. But when you open the throttle, just crack it about this much, which would be, you know, lower to mid-range throttle setting, you're uncovering, the throttle plate is uncovering this hole back here. And that hole is on the other side of this port, and that's when you start getting the vacuum. So this is the engine side. You have to remember the engine sucking air in is now applying vacuum to that hole, applying vacuum to the carburetor bowl, and so you're getting a leaner mixture going into the engine. Now, at lower throttle settings, you want, you know, you want the full fuel going in there that should be metered by the idle jets and booster jets. And you can see with the throttle body closed, the hole here is actually on the outside, so it's receiving atmospheric pressure. And conversely, at wide open throttle, you have almost no intake vacuum because the throttle body is completely open. So at wide open throttle, you're getting full fuel delivery as well. If we look here, there is a hole that seems to be just the regular atmospheric hole port to the carburetor bowl, which is normally there to equalize the pressure in the carburetor bowl. So I guess, and I don't know a lot about this, I guess when you're drawing vacuum, this port here prevents there from being too much vacuum drawn, but it seems like an awfully small hole, which means that when you are drawing some vacuum, you actually do get a partial vacuum, so you're subjecting the carburetor bowl to a percentage of the intake vacuum. So when we open this carburetor bowl up, we can see, as we saw before, there's a float in here. So when your carburetor bowl gets full, this float comes up and hits this lever, and it closes off the needle valve here, which in turn closes off fuel supply from the fuel pump. So you're not going to be, you know, overflowing your carburetor with fuel. In the carburetor bowl itself, there seems to be just this pin that's coming up, and it looks to me like that just locates the slide. So there's a hole in the slide, and I think that pin just goes into it. But if you look there at the back, there's a hole in the bottom. It's going to allow fuel to be drawn in through here and up through the main jet of the carburetor. To clean this carburetor, I'm going to start by stripping it down and taking out all of the covers and screws and jets to give access to all the small holes. And I'm also going to take off any plastic parts that might be ruined by the strong chemical dip that I'm going to use as a carb cleaner. The big screw on the bottom is just a cover and will allow us access to remove the mixing tube. We can then just slip a standard screwdriver in there and unscrew the mixing tube, which I should note does protrude into that plastic venturi in the throttle body and holds it in place. So unscrewing the mixing tube and taking it out will allow us to also remove this plastic venturi that we don't want melting in our carb dip. Fuel gets sucked up through these little holes and then up into the venturi there. With that out, I'm going to continue removing these covers for the access ports in the bottom end of the carburetor. The other cover on the bottom is an 11mm nut, and taking that off will allow us access to the main jet. Righty-tighty, lefty-loosey, Andrew. Turn it the right way. Looking down in there, we can see the main jet. Now, this can be removed with a standard screwdriver, but don't do like I did and use too small a screwdriver, because the jet itself is brass and it's soft, and you'll chew it up if you start trying to turn on it with something that doesn't quite fit. The trick, though, is to get a screwdriver that's narrow enough to go down in and reach it, but that properly engages the screw head part of the jet. I did kind of mangle it a little bit there. Shouldn't have used that tiny screwdriver. I should have used an appropriate size one, but... Before removing the idle mixture screw, it's common practice to screw it all the way down and count the turns it takes to bottom it out so that you can have a general idea of how to set it when you're reinstalling. Now, I started to do this, but I couldn't decide if it was actually a mixture screw or not, so I just took it all the way out. But that shouldn't really be a problem. I'll just deal with setting it once the motor's back together. Let's go ahead and get this throttle linkage off. All right, this guy's pretty caked in stuff. I don't know what this is, but let's undo it. Oh, there's stuff attached to this. Surprise! And that's going down into here. So the long thing going down into there. Next, I needed to remove a metal plug that just covers some air holes and a gallery behind it. And at first I tried to hammer a pick in there to pry it out, but that just succeeded in bending the pick. So I ended up drilling a small hole and then being able to reach a pick in there behind it and pry it out. I just put a scratch there. So with all of these being about the same size still and they don't look damaged, the size of these holes is extremely important. Hopefully I didn't gunk that up, but we'll see. I think it should be okay. These holes are important in regulating air and fuel flow at idle and low throttle settings, and as you can see, they're uncovered different amounts as I open the throttle plate. So the pattern of holes and where they are is basically like a mechanical programming of air and fuel at different throttle positions. Alright, I keep calling it Chem Dip, but it's actually this parts cleaner that I got at the auto parts store. It looks like it's good for cleaning parts and carburetors. They got one on the front there. I'm assuming it'll work. We got a little bucket in here. Alright. And this guy, make sure he gets pretty submerged. We're gonna go ahead and leave this in here for a while. It should take, I'm gonna leave it in there for probably 24 hours and come back and visit it. Well, it's about 3 days later, and this carburetor's been sitting here in carb cleaner, though you really only need to leave it in there probably overnight. Would do unless it's super dirty. I just haven't had a chance to get back here until now. Let's pull this thing out and start putting it all back together. This carb cleaner is pretty nasty stuff, so you're going to want to make sure you don't get it on you and wear gloves when you're handling it. So the idea is we want these little holes very clean. They really need to be quite clean. To get everything completely dry, I ended up just using some compressed air to blow out all the holes and little passages in the carburetor. But if you don't have access to compressed air in a can, like computer duster or something, would probably work just fine. Now while everything dries off here, let's see about matching up our pieces and getting this thing back together. If we look here in the manual, it tells us that this side bowl carburetor was used on a whole bunch of different motors that go all the way up to 115, I think, horsepower. However, the one they have listed here actually has a fuel filter on top, and all the models they show here have this same fuel filter on top. But if we look on my carburetor, it does not have that same filter assembly on top that we see here. It's only the pin and valve assembly for the float that meters fuel into the bowl from the fuel pump. So I actually had a little bit of trouble trying to find the proper kit for this. There's a product number on the bottom here, if you're curious, it is 1368, which seems to be pretty constant. I can't make out the casting there, something 676. But more importantly, I realized that a lot of the carburetors for these motors had a designation of WMK4. Now, I looked at the stamping more carefully, and what you can see on the side here is you can barely make out a K34, and if in the right light, you can almost see an M. And so I assumed it's WMK34, and when you look that up, you indeed do get this style carburetor, which allows us to look up a parts diagram. What this site shows is that you have a few old kits, and the current kit here for rebuilding the carburetor or repair parts kit is the 1395 5109. And so I have that pulled up here, and it's by Quicksilver, so this is the Mercury brand. And this is the correct kit, and as you can see, this gasket shape right here matches the shape of the carburetor where it meets up to the block, to the intake. And this O-ring right here, that gasket matches up to the gasket on the underside of this fuel valve. Alright, so let me show you what we need to do here. To replace the fuel inlet valve here, I need to pull out this pin and pull out this pin, and the way they are, it looks like you can only push them out one way. So I'm going to actually push this one out down, and this one, it looks like I'm going to have to push out this way as well. This nut here is an 8mm, by the way, so let's just break that free. Ah, there's a copper washer down there. Okay. This little thing is the seal. There's a seal down in there. And you know, I suppose it couldn't hurt to give this a dunk in carb cleaner real quick as well. Alright, so let's start reassembling this carburetor here. I'm going to go ahead and start with putting this plug back in. This is the plug over that covers all of these different holes. And I'm just going to go ahead and set this in. These go convex side out, and the way they work is they sit on a little lip there, and they just kind of rest in there, like you can almost tap it out. Okay, maybe this one you can't, but when you push down in the middle, it goes from being convex to being flat, and that squeezes it out and holds it in place. So I'm just going to go ahead and take this 1/4 inch extension and hit it down on there. I'm going to do that on the ground though, so I'm not destroying everything up here. So as you can see, now that I've dimpled that in, it's stuck itself in place nicely. Now it's just a matter of reassembly and replacement of the old parts with the new ones provided in the carb rebuild kit. This is exactly the reverse of disassembly, and it's pretty straightforward, but I'm actually glad I had the video of disassembly to refer to, so I was absolutely sure that I was getting it all back together correctly. Alright, most of our parts are back in. I need to find this screw. I'm dumb. I'm just an idiot. I lost it. I'll get back with you in a second. Well, I dumped my trash out and I'm putting it back in piece by piece. And I found it. It's right there. Alright, enough playing in the trash. Let's get to work. And let's go ahead and reassemble our top. I'm gonna go ahead and pull that out of the cleaner right now. First thing I'm gonna do is go ahead and put this new valve seat on there. All the old parts looked really good, but we got a new kit here, and there are some parts that needed replacing, like this gasket, this copper washer here. So I'm going to drop that down in there, get that guy seated. I'm going to throw this guy in here. But really, everything looked quite good. Our new needle is basically indistinguishable from the old one. I mean, there are little notches in the old one that look like just a different manufacturer style, but the tip's not eroded away, or there's no groove in there, so looks good to me. I'm not going to tighten those pins in until I know that everything fits together. And this, I know went like this, so let's compare these. The styles are a little different on these, but I don't think it matters. Substantively, I think they're the same. That looks right to me. So with that gasket installed, the float's in there on its little stem. Let's go ahead and install it. I'm just going to go ahead and install it loosely for now because we'll actually have to take this off to get this bolt in, to bolt it back on the block. Next thing we're going to do is stick this throttle arm back on here. And we can adjust this later. It looks like you can adjust the idle throttle position here because if you back this screw off, there's wiggle room. So I'm just going to set it in the middle for right now. So as you remember, this is the back drag style carburetor, which has this hose connecting some intake vacuum to the carburetor bowl at certain throttle settings. I'm going to go ahead and reattach this hose right now, but eventually I'm going to look into blocking this off so that we no longer have this connection, and in fact maybe just get atmospheric pressure here all the way through, because one effect of this is it can actually lean out the engine too much, and you can end up running lean conditions, which makes the engine run hotter than it should, and you can do things like burn out pistons and just increase general engine wear.
Getting the carburetor mounted back to the block wasn't a big deal, but one of the biggest pains was getting the choke spring and intake cover grill aligned and installed back on the carburetor.
Oh my god, I'm gonna lose my...
Now, the best I can tell you is to pay attention to how it comes apart, and also that the choke spring needs to be in this configuration with the spring engaged on the choke plate, but on the outside of the plastic grill, hooked to the screw that holds the grill in, underneath the coil spring. Now, also don't forget to install the washer that holds the other end of the choke spring in place before installing the nut.
Let's see, make sure this works. Look at that, it works. Well, the carburetor's back on, and it was a little bit of a struggle there, but I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time on the After Work Garage.